begin this debate, my team and I affirm the topic. The U.S. should recognize Palestinian sovereignty. The affirmative finds it necessary that in order to do justice to people that have dealt with much in the past, the resolution must be passed. For the welfare of society, Palestine must be recognized as a sovereign nation deserving an independent state, and we will go through the following claims as to why the affirmative has taken this stance. The importance of independence, the move's historic and moral justifications, the establishment of a two-state system, the internationalization of these political tensions, and finally how it can impact the U.S. government as a whole. First, through passing this resolution, assistance from the UN General Assembly in producing an independent state. After World War II, Israel was created from the Zionist movement to help provide a safe, stable state for people of Jewish descent. When Palestine does the same to provide its people from an independent state, the Israelis prevent any kind of action. This action.
So, in the beginning, a British mandate gave the Israelis the West Bank, and the West Bank, the portion that the Israel got, was much smaller than what they had historically had as a land. So the Israelites already gave up much of their homeland originally. So you can expect the Israelites to be very defensive of their homeland right now. And in 1947, the UN General Assembly Resolution in 181 recommended that there would be two states in enemies to attack it. A sovereign, so the affirmative side wants a sovereign Palestinian state. A sovereign Palestinian state would be legally allowed to let other countries like Iran base weapons and their military inside its borders, which right now, since Palestine is not officially like a recognized country.
Countries in the United Nations have actually stood forward and tried to create some kind of two-state system. But the U.S. has constantly been against it and has constantly supported Israel. So if we do pass this resolution and if we support Palestinian sovereignty, then the whole UN can unanimously step into the situation. And if they unanimously step into the situation, we can get a better solution set into place. Because right now, this whole thing is illegitimacy. Because like I said, the U.S. is one of the few countries that doesn't support Palestinian sovereignty. Palestinians are actually against us because of the fact that we constantly support Israel in everything they do. No matter what the Israelites do, according to an independent article actually, basically the U.S. will support them. And unfortunately, the Palestinians have a bad opinion of the U.S. for that reason. If we support Palestinian sovereignty, we can show that we're a disinterested party. We have no bias towards either side, and we're willing to help out whoever succeeds.
So before, I would like to begin by attacking the affirmative side. Bias said that the U.S. would gain a lot of benefit from accepting Palestine as a sovereign state. However, if the U.S. did support Palestine as becoming a sovereign state, many of the Middle Eastern countries have a biased and negative feelings towards the West. And if the U.S. accepted Palestine, and if Palestine, the argument I'm trying to create is that there's still lots of oil in the region, and if more countries, sovereign countries in the region gain sovereignty, they will.
I'm sorry, I'm confused with the question. I mean, if you're saying that it's only going to increase the conflict, our argument is that the UN has already made Palestine a sovereign state, so your impact should have already happened. Our argument is that the U.S. is not recognizing it. If you're claiming that many people in the Arab countries hate the U.S., this is another reason to make them hate the U.S. even more, because they're the only country that have not recognized it.
Can you talk during your own time, please? If you're saying the argument is if the U.S. should recognize Palestinian sovereignty, I'm saying that why should.
In the event that Palestine's sovereignty would be recognized, Israel would become vulnerable to attacks from other aggressive Arab countries. There is already tensions between Israel and other Muslim countries in the area, and Israel being the only Jewish and apart from that smaller country in that area, Palestinian sovereignty would allow for other countries to place their arms and find a way to attack Israel, leading to more conflict within all the Arab countries, not only with Israel, but between them. And maybe given the U.S. Status as an ally of Israel, more conflict with Israel would lead to more intervention from the U.S.
Anything else you'd like to say? You still have
And the U.S. should recognize Palestine as a state because in order to have UN intervention and a proper split between Israel and Palestine, we need a mediator, which will be the UN, and this cannot be achieved until Palestine is recognized by the U.S. And in addition, if Palestine is recognized by the U.S., we have a lot less tension in the Middle East towards us because right now, many of the countries that oppose the state of Israel and are supporting Palestine have a negative image towards us because we don't recognize Palestine's statehood. And so I'll just end it with a statement here for the U.S. Would you rather piss off Israel or 9 other nations?
It's not really an if case. Those 9 countries are actually still very pissed off, and they will probably not calm down very soon. So the U.S. should not recognize Palestinian sovereignty because we wholeheartely back Israel in whatever situation, because they are our ally, and we will continue to stick by that and honor that. Thank you. For us.
Sending monetary aid seems like a great idea, helping these countries, helping them develop and all that good stuff, but it actually causes a lot of problems in these countries. For one, it doesn't actually provide infrastructure that the countries need to develop, and it in fact handicaps the governments because the governments aren't the ones providing their people with the things that they need. So when they look for help, they look to the U.S. instead of looking to their own government. And also, with money, it becomes almost totalitarianist because with the money becomes the man. It's just that's all the programs will ever be, is the U.S. pouring money into these countries. And yes, it does some good, but it doesn't have any long-term effects. The U.S. needs to create a long-term solution in these countries. Now, the way to do this is to go there and help build schools and build hospitals and help the government and train nurses and train teachers so they can train other teachers. And see, this would be a long-term solution to help these countries. Now, a good example of this is when we're kids, our teachers always tell us, don't go home and have your parents do your homework. And we all point at that kid in class who isn't doing their homework. Now, the point of this is, now what our parents did to help us is they helped us do our homework. They helped show us how to do it. So now that we're grown, we know how to do it on our own. That's what we need to do for these countries. Help use aid to provide infrastructure, not monetary aid, because that doesn't help them. We need to teach them how to become a developed nation.
It's the standard. So, considering the many achievements that have come from foreign aid, 0.01% of our GDP is barely anything. Let me just point out the achievements we've gained from foreign aid. There have been many relevant breakthroughs in several sectors in the recipients of foreign aid. In the field of global health, there's been a significant reduction in widespread diseases such as malaria, HIV, tuberculosis, and may I remind the audience that fewer numbers of infected people reduce the chances of disease spreading intercontinentally. This protects the American citizens here as well. In the field of environmental concerns, foreign aid has benefited a majority of countries by investing in training of farmers and agricultural services that prevent degradation of our environmental resources. Now, in the education sector, world literacy rates have increased by at least 33%. U.S. aid has actually improved efficiency in natural disaster prevention responses as well. Like Hannah mentioned earlier, we have research that proves that 1 in 5 American jobs actually depends on international trade. We see that this is really important to our research. Despite this, to make clear, our team's position is that we support good aid. Let me define good aid. Good aid is when actually the aid is organized and The aid is distributed in a precise, organized way, where we give it to usually non-profits and like humanitarian organizations instead of directly to the government, preventing corruption and stuff like that. Despite some problems with foreign aid, I hope I've made it clear enough that foreign aid is essential, that our policymakers in DC should not be too hasty in slashing funds that are meant for foreign aid. Thank you.
They should adopt a nuclear disarmament policy. And our plan is that effective January 1st, the United States will sign a nuclear disarmament treaty with Russia, China, France, and Britain to phase out all nuclear warheads and ballistic missiles to an upper bound of 200 weapons total. The agent will be the United States Department of Defense. The uranium disposal method will be weapons-grade uranium will be diluted so that it can be used in nuclear power plants. And the funding mechanisms would be normal means through taxpayers and deficit spending. Okay, so the problems with the status quo right now are that the world superpowers have thousands of nuclear warheads, so obviously non-proliferation has not worked out well. A world in which superpowers have large nuclear arsenals, they put the world at risk of an all-out nuclear war because if tensions rise, like as seen in the Cuban Missile Crisis, then we're at the brink of an all-out nuclear war, which is very, very bad. I shouldn't have to explain that. And the existence of a lot of nuclear weapons only encourages smaller countries to start building more nuclear programs, which takes funding away from all different kinds of things and undermines the concept of world peace.
The four events, just to quickly run over them, are: firstly, our plan prevents irreparable harm of nuclear war, which will lead to extinction. Secondly, it prevents arms races from happening. Thirdly, it encourages world peace through reducing the actual arms and reducing the amount of weapons we have in our arsenal. And lastly, reduces U.S. hegemony and destabilizes our role as the world police, which has many impacts I'm going to go into. So, firstly, by lowering the number of nuclear weapons, essentially we prevent irreparable harms that will result from a nuclear war. By reducing the amount of weapons to under 200, what that means is even if nuclear weapons are ever used, the actual impact scenario isn't going to be as horrific as it would be in the current status quo. Again, please keep in mind, we currently have around 5,000 nuclear weapons. Reducing it to a factor of 200 is a huge reduction, and it would mean the difference between the human race going extinct and between a nuclear war, which would be horrible, but we would at least be able to recover from such a war.
And national security remain on the forefront of those interests. For this reason, the United States federal government should prioritize its own interests first, as no other nation will be inherently held to protect the U.S. federal government's interests before its own. Vote negative if you believe the preservation of the United States nuclear arsenal is key to the preservation of the United States' best domestic or foreign interests. Contention 1. A nuclear arsenal is key to preserving the United States' hegemony and the stabilization of international order. Nuclear arsenals provide the United States a bastion of strength, and that is key in uniting the global community. Thayer, 2007, writes from the Missouri State University, maximizing the power of the United States adds to its ability to defend itself from attacks and to advance its interests. Due to this power, the United States is able to defeat its enemies the world over and to reassure its allies and to dissuade states from challenging it. These advantages keep the United States, its interests, and its allies secure, and it must strive to maintain its advantages in international politics as long as possible. And will be the direct deterioration of America's diplomatic clout. This is already in display in the Western Pacific Ocean, where America's ability to hedge against the growing ambitions of a rising China is being called into question by its allies. The ability of the United States to reassure friends, deter competitors, coerce belligerent states, and defeat enemies does not rest on the strength of our political leaders, but rather on the strength of our big stick that the United States succeeds in advancing its diplomatic priorities. Only by building a full-spectrum military force can America reassure friends and allies that they can count on our future support. Thus, it is offered.
And whenever tensions run that high, the prospect of war becomes more and more likely. For example, we brought up in our first speech the Cuban Missile Crisis, where all it takes is a tiny spark, and all those tensions that have been built up for so long because of the nuclear arms race that was running essentially leads to nuclear war. Or no.
Okay, thank you. So can I ask you, in your plan text, you mentioned 5 nations, right? So there's not like a direct positive contentious situation between the U.S. and the Russians or something in your plan text.
You guys stated that an arms race would be economically beneficial because all the expensive resources that you're investing in, essentially, it's economically beneficial according to a Keynesian standpoint, right? That's what you guys are saying? So, isn't that kind of fallacious along the lines of a broken window fallacy? All the resources that you're using, all the money you're spending, is just money that you're diverting from other sectors that would have been used elsewhere. The entire country gets mobilized and switches its
priorities. This will prevent nuclear war. Once again, it's not enough to deter it simply by lowering the weapon supply to a maximum of 200 nuclear weapons. Second of all, they've stated with arm racing that this is going to prevent the nuclear arms race. However, this is not the case at all. It's not in the direct interest of any bad. They've simply stated it's going to decrease U.S. hegemony, but they have not actually given an example as to how and why that is a good thing. I'll shut up. 30 seconds. Okay. And essentially, the reason why the negation today has won this debate is because the affirmation within their plan text is not, they have not actually drawn any direct links to any of their claims. So essentially, they have just said some stuff.
Trials, or the opportunity to look for countries who grant them asylum. They'd have a secret prison cell waiting for them, or possibly a firing squad.
You okay if you grab my seat?
This will not only lead to a mistrust of the government in developing nations, but will also create an opportunity for the elites who want to exploit the country. Lack of involvement in the government and civil liberties will be stifling for most of the world's citizens. A Chinese form of government also prevents total freedom for people. Most of the world's citizens, especially Americans, value the amount of freedom in their country. People want the ability to exercise their personal liberties and show their nationalism at their own will. They do not want to be forced to show the extreme form of nationalism the Chinese have to. The Chinese government seems to have a strong hold on the lives of its citizens. As witnessed in documentaries such as Please Vote For Me, students are forced to stand in formation and salute the Chinese flag and sing the national anthem daily. They have to go to class in formation, and failure to follow the rules would lead to severe punishment. This structured life resembles that of one in the military.
The Chinese way? Over the past 100 years, the combination of liberal democracy, private capitalism, and political rights have catapulted the United States and other Western democracies to new levels of economic development. However, emerging markets don't have this luxury when they are more focused on whether or not they will have food, shelter, education, and healthcare, rather than if their governor was elected democratically or not. Democracy isn't always the best system for a nation if it cannot deliver their citizens the necessities to survive. Unlike the United States, China focuses on state capitalism, a de-emphasis on democracy, and they prioritize economic rights over political rights. A few of the characteristics known as the Chinese way. This system has emerged as the system to follow in emerging nations because it can deliver better living standards in a shorter period of time compared to democracy. There is an increase of admiration from developing countries like Nigeria and Ethiopia because of the clear evidence of China's solid infrastructure.
In one country doesn't necessarily work in a different country. Or take into account the fact that different cultures sometimes have different values. The Chinese culture values success, efficiency, and the various things we see in China. However, when you look at countries such as India, they do not have those same values. They value different things like their own freedom or personal liberty. I know most Americans would not want to live on the Chinese way, and we can't guarantee that other people want it either. What we're saying is we don't need to, if the people choose something, we don't necessarily need to stop it like Vietnam. But if the people are being forced into a system, it is our duty to stop them from being oppressed. What we're arguing against is we do not want a new Iron Curtain to fall across the entire Asian continent. We also claimed in our opening that China should not become the Soviet Union of the 21st century. Do we really want a superpower China rivaling America and causing endless conflicts such as almost nuclear Armageddon, such as the Cuban Missile Crisis? It should now maybe like a Philippine Missile Crisis or something similar.
They would just do it.
Our people and many people across the world value freedom, such as we'd like to know what our government's
state capitalist structure.
Yes, but that was more in reference to it being a superpower, not necessarily its form of government.
Okay, in that sense, why does there only have to be one superpower in the world, and that being the United States? Why can't the United States and China work collaboratively?
Well, as you can tell, there's definitely a lot of tension between us and China almost all the time, so it would undoubtedly go into the Cold War situation.
I'm sorry, that makes no sense. You're saying that the United States and China, because they have two different forms of government, would immediately assume a Cold War-like scenario?
It's happened almost every time it happened in history.
Okay, I'm going to redirect. So, if China and the United States...
We stand for freedom, and the Chinese way only brings oppression. If the Chinese way is allowed to spread, there will be a loss of freedoms for people around the world and a significant decrease in the amount of public participation in government. There will be no popular voting, which means that governments that adopt the Chinese way will not be held responsible for their actions. They can pretty much do anything that they want to just stay in power, and like it happened in Tibet, they'll just try and get more countries to do what they want. And government transparency will completely disappear since governments won't answer the people anymore. The opposition says that they eventually, after they were able to create 8 countries, there would be a lot of violence required to get the people of most countries to follow the Chinese way. We're not saying that the US has to force democracy on everyone, but we have to help stop the Chinese way so that people don't have to live in fear of their governments, and we need to keep the world free of oppression. Before you decide that the Chinese way is beneficial, can I just finish my sentence?
Sure.
Okay, please consider that the Chinese way is only a step away from becoming an Orwellian 1984 type of society. Nobody wants to live in this kind of lifestyle.
We might fail along the way. What also needs to be acknowledged is that the Chinese way has become not a destination, more of a stepping stone. We can see from countries like Vietnam, Russia, and even China itself that once a nation's economy is stabilized, it can move forward into other forms of government. We would also like to make you aware that the affirmation's entire case is invalid. Their definition of the Chinese way is built around the assumption that this system is a synonym of communism, whereas the truth is that the Chinese way is actually a looser construction of state capitalism. Furthermore, our opposition has used points like a strong nationalism to identify this form of the Chinese way as a dangerous movement, which I frankly do not understand. At this point in time, I don't think that America has the time or resources to interfere on the international field at such a deep level, and it's clearly not our place to make such decisions for other countries. I would also like to put forth the case that our opposition is not promoting the Chinese way. It is not promoting democracy. So what form of government are you promoting? And frankly, at this point in time, I would also like to make it clear that we already have 99 problems and we do not need another.
Such as the Koch brothers are able to donate exponentially more resources than the average American family.
What are you trying to?
Propositions such as cutting Obamacare funding and decreasing minimum wage are clearly steps pushed by the Koch family to transform the United States into an oligarchic system run by the wealthy. If campaign finance reforms are not enacted, disproportionate levels of funding will continue to support legislation that goes against the nature of a representative democracy. The purpose of a representative democracy is for political representatives to speak out on behalf of all of the constituents, not just the ones who are able to donate huge sums of money. The blatant preference for the opinions of the wealthy few is evidence for the corruption caused by today's system of campaign finance. The political system has shifted to favor money over the will of the people, which is why my team is arguing for further restrictions on the funding any given candidate is allowed to receive. We will also discuss why the current...
And the main problem with that is that it's at its core a violation of First Amendment rights. So cutting campaign spending doesn't allow a candidate to reach out as much as they could. If campaign spending is regulated, a smaller audience will be reached by campaigns, because virtually any form of communication in modern times requires some form of payment, and that's usually money. If candidates want to hire people to call, they need to pay those employers. If candidates want to organize debates, they need to pay for a venue and for things to organize that debate. If they want to make commercials, they have to pay for the commercials. And by regulating the spending, it would make it harder for a candidate to push their platform to the people, and that would just cause a less educated public when it comes to voting. So there's a case.
By the points you just saw, they couldn't defend the fact that less famous candidates won't be able to get their voices out to the public, and this is simply because the incumbent will have the advantage as far as propaganda and like having their name out there is concerned. Like, everyone knows Obama. Why is that? It's because he's been in office for so long, everyone knows him. Like, that's the point of the mere exposure effect that my partner brought up, is that we prefer those that we are more familiar with, and that this is extremely beneficial in voting is because we will tend to choose people that we know better. Extensive research shows that it is harder for a challenger to beat an incumbent in a race without spending at least as much or more than an incumbent on campaigning. So basically what this means is that a challenger will have to spend more than an incumbent on campaigning. And if we have limits on campaign spending, this will stagnate political competition, and therefore we can assume that the affirmation is against democracy.
All right, that's 1 minute. Cross-examination can now begin.
We need to spend more money to be able to win an election against a more popular candidate. So why is it important? Why should elections be determined by how much money a candidate spends versus like his ideology and how people would actually, like how people, what candidate people actually want?
The only way for a candidate to get his ideology out to the public is through spending money through propaganda and like speeches and renting venues. So I'll ask you, how will a candidate do that with limited funds?
Because the other candidates will also have limited funds.
That doesn't matter. If it's an incumbent, they'll be more popular already, so they'll already have an advantage. Are you advocating political stagnation?
What about the super rich? This is based on political parties and their different policy makings. Like David Koch, he spends he is a super rich individual who's able to spend like $60 million in political elections.
Okay, that's time. Sorry about that. All right, so we're gonna have a 4-minute period where the
funds as well as make public those who contribute in campaign financing and limit contributions from corporations to elections. I firmly believe you won today's debate, and here's why. The negation's argument centers around the idea that in order for a candidate to be able to win elections, he needs to be funded well. And the problem with this is that this creates candidates have a dependency on their funders now. Rather than representing their constituents, candidates are forced to represent their funders because the political culture in America, due to campaign financing, leads to a system where the candidates that can win are the ones that are funded better.
Overall, in conclusion, it's important to follow the amendments that we established, to benefit from the freedom that we deserve, spend money that we think is worth spending. More cash putting into campaign financing is not a way that leads to corruption, but instead it brings more democratic challenge between candidates. Unlike the idea of a firm side saying that more funds lead to limitation on equal votes, overspending donors bribes candidates for their own benefit. First, for the candidates, they have to be elected in order to accede their policy for their donors. So, and on the other side, the depth of money cashed into the campaign financing is usually direct proportional to the depth of citizen understanding of the policy candidate promotes, allowing new candidates to have a better chance